One small act of love can change the fate of an entire world. In the Harry Potter saga, one such love, Severus Snape's lifelong devotion to Lily Evans, altered the course of wizarding history. Snape's love for Lily ultimately drove him to betray Voldemort, protect Harry, and play a pivotal role in the Dark Lord's defeat. But imagine a world in which that love never blossomed. What if Severus Snape never loved Lily Evans at all? In this speculative retelling, we'll explore an alternate timeline, a darker, uncertain history of the wizarding world, where a single missing bond turns heroism to villainy. "He was probably the bravest man I ever knew," Harry Potter once said of Severus Snape. Yet that bravery in the original timeline was born from Snape's private grief and unrequited love. Lily Evans was Snape's guiding light, the one friendship that gave him a chance to choose love over hate. It was Lily's influence and memory that pulled Snape back from the brink. Without it, how might Snape's story, and the stories of everyone around him, have unfolded differently? Let's step back into the past, alter a crucial detail, and watch the dominoes fall in a new direction. To understand the divergence, we must first recall the original path. Severus Snape began life as a lonely, sharp-tongued boy from Spinner's End, a down-at-heel part of Cokeworth. His family life was unhappy, a neglectful Muggle father, an overwhelmed witch mother, leaving young Severus isolated and resentful. Everything changed when he met Lily Evans, a girl from the same town, with bright green eyes and an innate magical talent. At age 9, Severus spotted Lily on a playground flowerbed, making a blossom open and close with a touch of her hand. He knew at once what she was, what he was too. They were both wizards. Well, Lily, a witch. Severus mustered the courage to approach the sisters, Lily and Petunia, there by the swings. Awkward and intense, he blurted out the truth. Lily was a witch, and he could prove it. In that moment, a connection sparked. Lily, delighted and curious, found her first magical friend in Severus. He was the one who introduced her to the wizarding world, explaining Hogwarts and magical society to her, long before she ever received her acceptance letter. Despite Severus's shabby clothes and Petunia's open disdain for the boy from the poor side of town, Lily welcomed Severus's friendship. She was kind to him, likely the first person who had ever shown Severus genuine warmth. They became inseparable friends in those pre-Hogwarts years. The two children would meet in secret down by the river or in the shadow of the mill, sharing confidences and excitement about the magical education ahead of them. For Severus, who had known only neglect and bullying, this friendship was a lifeline, a chance to escape his troubled home life and dream of a brighter future. Lily's companionship was a revelation. She was his light, giving him something innocent and good to love. By the time they were ready to attend Hogwarts, Severus Snape was utterly smitten with Lily Evans, though as a boy he likely didn't yet understand those feelings as love. All he knew was that Lily made him feel valued. Their arrival at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in 1971, however, marked the beginning of complications. The Sorting Hat placed kind, brave Lily into Gryffindor, while Severus, ambitious, brooding, and drawn to power, went to Slytherin. The two friends were now separated by house rivalry and physical distance, Gryffindor Tower versus the dungeons. Still, in the early years they tried to maintain their bond. They studied together when they could and confided in each other. Lily excelled at potions, Professor Slughorn's star pupil, and charms. Severus, a prodigy in the dark arts and potion-making himself, delighted in sharing his textbook insights with her. Their friendship baffled others. Many of Lily's fellow Gryffindors, including her eventual suitor James Potter, couldn't understand why she'd hang around Snivellus, the sallow, sarcastic Slytherin. Likewise, Severus's budding Slytherin comrades, like Avery and Mulciber, teased him for spending time with a Muggle-born girl. Yet Lily defended Severus, and Severus treasured Lily. However, as the years passed, dark clouds gathered in their friendship. Severus became increasingly fascinated by the dark arts, inventing hexes and jinxes and exchanging forbidden spells with his Slytherin cohorts. Lily, compassionate and inherently opposed to dark magic, grew uneasy with the company he kept. She knew that Mulciber and Avery, Severus's house friends, were flirting with something sinister. They had a cruel streak Lily detested. More than once, she scolded Severus for hanging around that lot, who were already calling themselves future Death Eaters, in jest. Lily tried to be Severus's conscience, urging him to see the cruelty and prejudice that Voldemort's ideology spread. But the more she pushed, the more Severus, nursing lifelong resentments, resisted. He was drawn to Voldemort's ideas of power, and to the dark spells that promised respect for someone who'd always been looked down on. Still, for a while, Severus restrained his worst impulses to avoid losing Lily. Her friendship was that precious to him. Everything unraveled during their 5th year. The simmering tensions at Hogwarts exploded on a sunny afternoon by the Black Lake after OWL exams. James Potter and Sirius Black, teenage marauders, had taken to bullying Severus at every opportunity, in part because James fancied Lily and hated Severus's closeness to her. On this day, James publicly humiliated Snape, jinxing him in front of a crowd. Lily, witnessing the scene, stepped in to stop James, defending her friend. But the proud, embarrassed Snape lashed out at the one person trying to help. He sneered at Lily, calling her a filthy mudblood. The slur, a grave insult to Lily's muggle-born status, hung in the air, shocking everyone, Lily most of all. In that instant, years of friendship were shattered. Severus immediately regretted it. He hadn't meant to hurt Lily, and he begged her forgiveness afterward. But the damage was done. Hurt and angry, Lily asked him an earnest question. Did he really plan to become a Death Eater after school? When Severus couldn't deny it, Lily realized he had chosen a dark path over their friendship. "You've chosen your way, I've chosen mine," she said sadly, and she walked out of his life. That was the end of Lily Evans and Severus Snape's friendship. Lily would go on to date and eventually marry James Potter, the boy who had once tormented Severus. Snape, heartbroken and filled with self-loathing, would indeed join Lord Voldemort's ranks after graduation. Yet Severus's love for Lily never died. Even after she cut ties, even as he delved deeper into Voldemort's circle, Snape remained quietly obsessed with Lily. He spied on news of her, bitterly watched from the sidelines as she fell in love with James, and probably tried in small ways to atone, though nothing could undo the hurt he'd caused. This buried love became crucial a few years later. By 1980, Lord Voldemort's reign of terror was in full swing. Severus Snape, now a young Death Eater, delivered a crucial piece of information to his master, a prophecy he had overheard. At the Hogshead Inn, Professor Trelawney had given Albus Dumbledore a prophecy about the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, a child born as the 7th month dies. Snape, lurking unseen, caught only part of this prophecy and immediately reported it to Voldemort. Only after the fact did he learn, to his horror, that the Dark Lord interpreted the prophecy as referring to Lily Evans's infant son, Harry Potter. In other words, by dutifully passing on that prophecy, Snape had unwittingly marked Lily's family for death. This realization was Snape's moment of truth in the canonical timeline. Voldemort decided to go after baby Harry, a half-blood like himself, instead of the other possible child, Neville Longbottom. Snape, hearing Lily was now a target, was horrified. His love for Lily surged to the forefront. In desperation, he first begged Voldemort to spare Lily's life. "Do what you want with the husband and child, but please spare her." Voldemort, who valued Snape's service, agreed only to the extent that he would offer Lily a chance to step aside. No more. Still frantic, Snape took a greater risk. He secretly turned to Albus Dumbledore. On a stormy hilltop, Snape met Dumbledore in secret and offered his allegiance in exchange for the protection of Lily and her family. He was trembling, overwrought, a Death Eater turning coat out of the one pure emotion he had left. Though Dumbledore was disgusted that Snape cared nothing for James or baby Harry. "You do not care, then, about the deaths of her husband and child. They can die, as long as you have what you want." He accepted Snape's plea. Dumbledore agreed to hide the Potters, on the condition that Severus Snape serve as his double agent inside Voldemort's circle. Snape, driven by love and remorse, agreed to do anything. From that point on, Severus Snape became an undercover spy for Dumbledore, an incredibly dangerous role that he never would have contemplated except to save Lily. Tragically, despite Snape's efforts, Lily Evans still perished. On Halloween night of 1981, Voldemort found the Potters in Godric's Hollow, betrayed by their secret keeper. He blasted his way into their cottage. James Potter was killed defending his wife and child. Lily, cornered, refused to step aside and let Voldemort murder her baby. Voldemort gave her one fleeting chance to move, an offer he made only because Snape had requested it. But Lily refused. She sacrificed herself in a burst of protective love, throwing herself in front of 1-year-old Harry. That sacrifice invoked ancient magic. Lily's love shielded Harry, causing Voldemort's killing curse to rebound upon the Dark Lord himself. In that moment, Voldemort was violently struck down. His body and powers were destroyed, and Harry Potter became known as the boy who lived. Lily's death, heartbreaking as it was, ensured her son would survive, and Voldemort would be defeated. And Severus Snape? He arrived too late to save Lily. In the aftermath, weeping in the ruined house, he cradled Lily's lifeless body, the woman he had loved since childhood, and something in him broke forever. From that day, Snape remained loyal to Dumbledore. His life's mission became honoring Lily's memory, protecting Harry from the shadows, helping Dumbledore plot Voldemort's ultimate downfall, even at the cost of Snape's own life. Every crucial intervention Snape made, preventing Quirrell from cursing Harry during Quidditch, feeding Dumbledore intel, killing Dumbledore on the headmaster's orders, covertly delivering Gryffindor's sword to Harry, and finally gifting Harry with his memories, all stemmed from his love and guilt for Lily. However flawed Snape was as a man, that love was his redemption. It turned a bitter Death Eater into an unsung hero. That is the established history we know. Now, it's time to unravel it. We will rewind the clock and alter one key element. Severus never forms a deep, loving attachment to Lily. Perhaps he never even befriends her at all, or their friendship remains shallow and short-lived. What cascade of changes would result? Let us imagine the divergence and its far-reaching consequences. A timeline where Severus Snape stays in the darkness from the very start. How could Severus Snape possibly not love Lily Evans? Given how pivotal their connection was, it requires a significant change early on. For our scenario, let's envision a less kind first meeting between them in childhood. Picture the scene. Cokeworth, sometime around 1969. Lily Evans, a bright 9-year-old, is playing with her sister Petunia at the neighborhood park. A scrawny, black-haired boy, Severus Snape, watches from behind a tree, nervously tugging at his ill-fitting coat. In the original timeline, Severus revealed himself and managed to charm Lily with news of her magical gift. But in this alternate timeline, imagine young Severus is even more maladroit and resentful. Perhaps Petunia catches him spying and shrieks, and Severus, embarrassed, reacts harshly. Instead of patiently explaining the wizarding world, he blurs out something cruel, mocking Petunia's non-magic status in a truly unkind way, or directing an insult at Lily out of defensive habit. Lily, taken aback by this unpleasant, scowling boy, feels more fear than fascination. Petunia drags her away, and this time, Lily listens to her sister's warnings. That boy is bad news. Maybe Lily and Severus get a second chance to talk, but the encounter starts on rocky footing and never recovers. Lily finds Severus odd, creepy even, and doesn't encourage his companionship. Severus, pride hurt, doubles down on sullen hostility. The friendship that should have been never truly blossoms. At most, Lily Evans becomes an acquaintance, the girl from down the road whom Severus knows is a witch like him, but not a friend he holds dear. She remains polite if they occasionally meet, but distant. Severus, for his part, perhaps feels a flicker of intrigue toward Lily, but he stifles it. Whether out of social ineptitude or an already cynical heart, he never grows close enough to Lily to develop that fierce love. The emotional bond is severed before it can form. When they arrive at Hogwarts at age 11, the gulf between them only widens. Lily is sorted into Gryffindor as before, bold and kind-hearted. Severus still goes to Slytherin, but now they don't have a strong pre-existing friendship to attempt to maintain. Lily falls in with her fellow Gryffindors early, perhaps befriending the likes of Mary MacDonald or Alice Fortescue. Severus finds his camaraderie among the Slytherin crowd exclusively: Mulciber, Avery, Wilkes, Rosier, and other students who share his interest in the dark arts. Without Lily's positive influence keeping him somewhat in check, young Snape dives headlong into his worst tendencies. He experiments with hexes and curses from the get-go, impressing his Slytherin peers with nasty jinxes. Instead of feeling guilty when Lily voices disapproval, here he has no dear friend's opinion to restrain him. He openly revels in forbidden magic. The wedge that separated Lily and Severus in the original history now drives between them far sooner and far more completely. By fifth year, when the infamous incident by the lake occurs, James Potter's cruel bullying of Snape after OWLs, things play out a bit differently. James still torments Snape. Their mutual enmity needs to be explored further, but the dynamics have shifted significantly due to their earlier encounters. The friendship that could have been is now a distant memory, no special circumstances. But this time, Lily doesn't rush to Severus's defense. Why would she? They're barely on speaking terms now, certainly not best friends. Perhaps Lily still feels bad for any student humiliated by her fellow Gryffindors. Her innate decency might prompt her to intervene, as she hates bullying. But her intervention is more perfunctory, like a prefect scolding classmates rather than a friend fiercely protecting a friend. Leave him alone, she might say, but without the personal touch that once made Snape call her a derogatory name in frustration. In fact, maybe Snape doesn't call Lily mudblood at all in this timeline, because she's not there imploring James to stop, or if she is, Severus has no intimate history with her to twist into that particular venom. He might still resent Lily, perhaps seeing her as yet another Gryffindor who hangs around my bullies, but not with the complicated mix of love and shame from the original moment. Either way, Severus Snape's school days conclude with him firmly entrenched among the future Death Eaters. Lily goes on to date James Potter in 7th year as in canon, though now there's no fraught history with Snape making James stop hexing Snape for Lily's sake, or any of that. James likely still matures somewhat to win Lily's heart, but perhaps with less urgency regarding Snape. Severus leaves Hogwarts in 1978 with a heart unsoftened by any true friendship or love. He nurtures a festering grudge against the marauders who bullied him and a general contempt for Muggleborns and Muggles, views reinforced by his Slytherin associates. Crucially, Snape does not carry a secret torch for Lily into adulthood now. At most, he recalls her as a talented Muggle-born girl he once knew, maybe with a tiny pang of what might have been, but he has long since dismissed her significance. In this reality, Lily never represented hope or light to Snape. She was merely a childhood acquaintance who chose a different path. Without love to humanize him, Snape's moral compass tilts ever more toward darkness. Thus, upon graduating, Severus Snape embraces Lord Voldemort's service fully and without reservation. In the original timeline, even before Lily's death, Snape's soul was divided. He craved acceptance among Death Eaters, yet loved a woman diametrically opposed to them. That subtle conflict is now gone. The alternate Severus doesn't hesitate to join the Death Eaters and is eager to prove himself. His prodigious skills in potions and curses quickly earn him a place in Voldemort's inner circle, just as in canon, except now he has no second thoughts. He studies the dark arts not just out of youthful curiosity, but with fanaticism. Snape's inherent cleverness and ambition flourish in Voldemort's ranks. He is exactly the kind of talented, ruthless wizard Voldemort prizes. One might even imagine Snape becoming more cruel and fanatical than he ever was originally, since nothing holds him back from immersing himself fully in that world. He's no longer a double agent playing a part. He is genuinely one of Voldemort's most devoted followers. During this period, the late 1970s, Voldemort's power is growing, and the First Wizarding War rages. Snape participates in missions for the Dark Lord with zeal. We can speculate on his contributions, brewing complex poisons for use against the Ministry's auras, creating new dark spells to arm Voldemort's forces, and doing anything required to rise in the Death Eater ranks. His specialty in potions and hexes makes him a valuable asset. In whispers, some say young Snape is as inventive with dark magic as the Dark Lord himself. Certainly he shows no mercy to enemies. This Snape doesn't mind hurting others. He has no Lily in his heart to make him question brutality. If he ever feels a sting of conscience, he buries it under layers of bitterness. Meanwhile, Lily Evans's life follows its own course, separate from Severus. Lily and James Potter marry not long after Hogwarts and have a son, Harry, in July 1980. They become targets of Voldemort after defying him 3 times, as per prophecy. In our alternate timeline, Lily likely still joins the Order of the Phoenix along with James, fighting Voldemort openly. She remains the same courageous, loving person, only without any lingering sadness over Severus Snape. If anything, Lily might regard Snape with regret or disappointment from afar, having heard he indeed fell in with Voldemort. But she's busy with her new baby and the war. Snape is an afterthought to her, a distant mistake from youth, nothing more. It's against this backdrop that the prophecy of the Chosen One emerges in 1980, setting up the grand fate of this world. Here is where the absence of Snape's love truly makes its impact felt. The prophecy, as delivered by Sybil Trelawney to Dumbledore, is exactly the same. It speaks of a child born at July's end to parents who have thrice defied Voldemort, a child with the power to defeat the Dark Lord. In both timelines, Severus Snape is the one who overhears this prophecy and relays it to Voldemort. That much doesn't change. He's still a Death Eater and still present at the Hog's Head for that key moment. But what does change is Snape's motivation and reaction. In the original history, upon learning Voldemort intended to target Lily's son, Snape was horrified and desperately sought to protect Lily at all costs. In this alternate scenario, Snape feels no such horror. When Voldemort summons him and says, effectively, "Your information points to the Potter's child, Lily Evans's child, as my enemy. I will eliminate them." Snape doesn't reel in shock. Perhaps he has a fleeting memory of little Lily from Cokeworth, a ghost of an old emotion, but he quashes it. Lily means nothing to him now. Instead of begging for her life, this Snape likely nods in cold agreement. He might even volunteer to help. It's chilling to consider, but entirely plausible. Severus Snape, in this reality, may have been willing to hunt down the Potters personally. After all, they are enemies of the Dark Lord. Snape bears James Potter a deep grudge from school days. James tormented him for years, stole the spotlight, and married Lily. Not that Snape cares about Lily romantically here, but he surely resents James on principle. Harry Potter is just an infant, but if the Dark Lord wants the child dead, so be it. And Lily? She's a mudblood in Death Eater parlance, a member of the Order, a target like any other. If anything, Snape might harbour some buried resentment towards Lily for rejecting and avoiding him long ago. That spark of resentment could manifest as pitilessness. Where once love stayed his hand, now there is nothing. So no secret warning reaches Dumbledore from Snape. The Potters go into hiding under the Fidelius charm at Dumbledore's urging, for Dumbledore still knows the prophecy, but this time without the benefit of Snape's inside knowledge of Voldemort's plans. In the original timeline, Dumbledore at least knew Voldemort was hunting them specifically because Snape turned informant. In this alternate timeline, Dumbledore might suspect it, but he has no confirmation from a double agent. He's essentially operating blind beyond the prophecy itself. The Potters choose Peter Pettigrew as their secret keeper, just like before, and tragically, Pettigrew betrays them from within. Voldemort learns their location, and so, on Halloween 1981, events converge on Godric's Hollow, but with a very different outcome. Let's walk through that fateful night in this alternate universe, step by step, to feel the full weight of the change. It is dark and windy as Voldemort strides up the path to the Potter's cottage. He has come alone, cloaked and masked, eager to fulfill the prophecy on his own, much as he did in canon. There is no invisible Dumbledore watching over the house. Dumbledore can only hope his hiding charm holds. But Peter Pettigrew's treachery has nullified that hope. Voldemort approaches the door, and perhaps his lips curl into a cruel smile. Inside sleeps the child who might grow up to challenge me. I'll snuff out that threat tonight. James Potter sees the door blast open. He shouts for Lily to take Harry and run, even as he draws his wand. A duel ensues, brief and brutal. James, caught without his wand at the ready, is no match for Voldemort's power. In moments, Voldemort disarms and kills James, No questions asked, no pauses. He has no reason to spare James, and indeed he doesn't in the original timeline either. James collapses, lifeless, in the front room. Lily upstairs hears the attack and her husband's voice cut off. Imagine her terror, but also her resolve. Grabbing baby Harry from his crib, Lily tries frantically to flee through the back door or upstairs window, but Voldemort is too quick. The next thing she knows, the tall figure in black is there in Harry's nursery, magically blasting aside the door. Lily is cornered, her child in her arms. In the real timeline, Voldemort oddly offered Lily a chance to live, snarling at her to stand aside. He did this because Snape had begged him to spare Lily. In our alternate timeline, that mercy is never requested. Voldemort regards Lily with pitiless red eyes. She is merely an obstacle. Lily Evans, to her eternal credit, does not back down. She stands in front of the crib and spreads her arms, shielding her son. She is crying, begging, "Not Harry, please, take me instead." But her pleas fall on ears that do not care. Lord Voldemort, devoid of empathy, doesn't bother to argue or barter. There is no offer of step aside. There is only a flash of green light and a rushing sound as Voldemort murders Lily Evans on the spot. Lily dies instantly, crumpling to the floor. Her sacrifice, the ultimate act of love, is still meaningful. But here is the cruel twist. Because Voldemort never gave her an option to live, some theorize that the ancient magic of Lily's sacrifice might not be triggered in the same protective way. In the original timeline, Lily's deliberate choice to die rather than step aside created a powerful charm that shielded Harry. But what if Voldemort doesn't give her that chance? Lily certainly tried to protect her baby, but was the enchantment of her sacrifice fully invoked? It's a murky area of magic. Possibly, without the Dark Lord's momentary stay that allowed Lily to consciously sacrifice herself, the protection is weaker or non-existent. Now baby Harry is alone in the crib, wailing. Voldemort approaches, perhaps with a cold smile of triumph. He raises his yew wand. There is no reason for delay. The prophesied threat will be eliminated tonight. Avada Kedavra. A jet of green light strikes Harry. What happens next? In the canonical timeline, Lily's love created a shield that caused this very killing curse to rebound, destroying Voldemort's body and leaving Harry alive with only a lightning scar. In this alternate timeline, if Lily's sacrifice magic failed to deploy properly, Voldemort's curse would hit its mark. Harry James Potter dies, his life snuffed out almost before it began. The tiny child slumps silent in his crib. No scar, no cry, just stillness. Voldemort perhaps laughs in cruel satisfaction. The threat is over, the prophecy nullified, as far as he knows. He has just a couple of loose ends to tie up. The prophecy spoke of a child born to parents who defied him thrice. 2 candidates were possible. He chose Harry Potter. But there was another boy, Neville Longbottom, born one day before Harry, also to Order members who have defied Voldemort. Does Voldemort pause now and consider this? In his arrogance, he likely believes the prophecy is dealt with. He chose the more likely target, the half-blood child, reflecting his own half-blood heritage. That target is now dead at his feet. In Voldemort's mind, he has triumphed over fate. He need not bother with the other child, especially since the prophecy said either one could be a threat, but only one was marked as his equal. He's prevented that equal from rising. Why chase a pure-blood baby like Neville who, in Voldemort's prejudiced view, could never be as similar to himself as Harry was? More pragmatically, Voldemort may not even be certain Neville was an option. His information was incomplete. He might not realize the Longbottom's son fit the criteria, or if he does, perhaps he decides I'll deal with them later if needed. For now, the deed is done. Thus, on October 31st, 1981, Lord Voldemort stands amid the bodies of James and Lily Potter and the ashes of an infant's blanket, very much alive and victorious. Outside, no curious magical reversals announce his downfall. The heavens don't erupt in shooting stars, as they did in canon to celebrate Voldemort's defeat. Instead, the night sky is bleak. A cold wind sweeps through Godric's Hollow, carrying with it a sense of dread that soon spreads across the wizarding world. The boy who lived never lived at all. There is no chosen one left standing. The Potters are simply dead, tragically and unremarkably, as so many others who crossed Voldemort's path, and the Dark Lord is unscathed. In the days immediately following, the wizarding community slowly comes to realize what happened. Perhaps there are rumors. A dark mark over Godric's Hollow, the Potters found murdered, but no sign of the Dark Lord's corpse, no mysterious disappearance. In fact, Voldemort likely publicizes his triumph in some terrifying way. Maybe the Potters' bodies are found arranged as a macabre display, a warning to all. The Order of the Phoenix, instead of celebrating a miraculous victory, is stricken with despair. Their secret hope, the prophecy of a savior, appears to have been extinguished. Albus Dumbledore, who had quietly pinned so much on keeping baby Harry safe, must confront a crushing reality. Harry is gone. The one weapon he thought might have the power the Dark Lord knows not, love, has been snuffed out, at least in Harry's generation. Dumbledore is shrewd and wise. He might immediately suspect that Lily's sacrifice could have protected Harry if Voldemort gave her the option to surrender. Learning that all 3 Potters were killed, Dumbledore likely deduces that Voldemort did not relent at all. That subtle difference cost them dearly. What of the prophecy now? It actually said, the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, and either must die at the hand of the other. If Voldemort never marked anyone, since he never suffered a rebounding curse, perhaps the prophecy is unfulfilled, or a glimmer of hope. Perhaps it could refer to the other possible child, Neville Longbottom, if Voldemort ever turns his attention that way. Dumbledore might keep that in mind, but he knows prophecies are uncertain at best. Right now, the future looks bleak. Importantly, in this altered timeline, Severus Snape does not collapse in grief or remorse. When Voldemort reports that the Potters have been eliminated, or when word reaches Snape through Death Eater channels, Snape reacts very differently than in the original story. There is no anguished howl, no devastation. Perhaps he feels a tiny pang, learning that Lily Evans is dead, a distant melancholy for a childhood memory, but nothing like the soul-shattering pain that drove him to Dumbledore in the real timeline. If anything, Snape might be proud. His intelligence helped make this possible. He facilitated the destruction of the Dark Lord's enemy. Voldemort is pleased with him. In an ironic reversal, the same event that redeemed Snape in one timeline cements his damnation in this one. Indeed, Voldemort might reward Snape for his loyalty and foresight. The prophecy threat is handled. Voldemort's rise can continue unchecked. Snape's position within the Death Eaters is now stronger than ever. He proved himself invaluable by bringing the prophecy to his master's attention early. We can imagine Voldemort giving Snape a place of honor, perhaps entrusting him with more sensitive tasks or leadership roles. Snape, rather than covertly turning to Dumbledore, doubles down as Voldemort's man. He slips comfortably into the role of a trusted lieutenant for the Dark Lord, with all the grim privileges that entails. Now the timeline truly veers into unknown territory. Without Harry's miraculous survival, the First Wizarding War does not end in 1981. In the original history, Voldemort's sudden fall created a power vacuum. Many Death Eaters were arrested or fled, and a scarred peace returned for 13 years. Here, the war simply continues, perhaps even escalates, since Voldemort now feels invincible. Let's examine how events likely unfold in the 1980s and 1990s of this alternate reality, touching on key figures and the state of the magical world. The immediate aftermath, 1981-1982. The Potter family's murder is a devastating blow to the Order of the Phoenix. James and Lily were popular, beloved members of the Resistance. Their loss is personal for many, especially Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, and the child who was prophesied to have a chance at defeating Voldemort is gone. Morale plummets among the Order and their allies. Conversely, the Death Eaters are emboldened, fueled by their master's apparent immunity to what was supposed to be a fatal prophecy. They likely go on a renewed offensive. Sirius Black. In canon, Sirius was wrongly accused of betraying the Potters and was imprisoned after Peter Pettigrew framed him. In this timeline, similar events may occur. The Potters' location was betrayed, and Sirius, as their friend, would be shocked and grief-stricken. He might still confront Pettigrew in the street upon realizing Peter was the spy. Pettigrew, cornered, would stage his escape by faking his death in a blast that kills Muggle bystanders, leaving behind a severed finger. With no Harry alive, Sirius has even less to live for and might actually kill Pettigrew if he caught him. But let's assume Pettigrew still manages to slip away as a rat. The Ministry, desperate to find culprits for the Potter's murder, would seize on Sirius as the obvious suspect. He was the Potter's secret keeper in public perception. Sirius likely ends up arrested and thrown into Azkaban, as in canon, screaming his innocence to deaf ears. The difference is, in this timeline, there's no boy who lived to eventually exonerate him. He might languish in prison indefinitely, a tragic casualty of fate and false accusation. The Order loses Sirius's talents just when they could have used them most. Remus Lupin. Remus loses all his closest friends in one fell swoop. James and Lily dead, Sirius imprisoned and believed a traitor, Peter vanished, assumed dead. In canon, Remus drifted into lonely obscurity during peacetime. Here, since war continues, Dumbledore and the Order would still need every capable member. Remus, despite his lycanthropy, is a seasoned fighter and clever strategist. He likely remains active in the Order, possibly taking on more responsibility now that so many comrades have fallen. However, the toll on him emotionally is severe. One can imagine Remus channeling his grief into the fight, but he's also isolated and heartbroken. A sad side note, without Harry around, Remus's connection to the next generation is lost. He won't be asked to teach at Hogwarts in 1993 by a protective Dumbledore because the context for that, Harry's presence, isn't there. Instead, Remus might remain an underground operative, doing risky missions for the Order. Peter Pettigrew. If Peter escapes as a rat, he might actually be more valuable to Voldemort in this timeline. Consider, in canon, Peter went into hiding because Voldemort was gone, and he feared retribution from the remaining Death Eaters for his betrayal of the Potters. Here, Voldemort is still at large and knows Peter's role as his spy was crucial. Voldemort might summon Pettigrew to him and reward, or at least protect, him. Or Peter, cowardly as he is, might hide anyway, unsure of how secure his position among Death Eaters is. They're not a forgiving bunch. Some might blame him for leading Voldemort into a trap if any rumor spread that a prophecy existed. But since Voldemort was unharmed, they likely view it as success. It's plausible that Pettigrew rejoins Voldemort's fold openly, perhaps not as a high-ranking lieutenant. Voldemort values power and Peter is weak, but as a useful informant or errand boy. For instance, Peter's ability to transform into a rat could help with espionage or infiltrating places. In any case, we don't get the scenario of Pettigrew resurrecting. Voldemort, that ritual in 1994 with Harry's blood isn't needed. Voldemort still has his body. Instead, Peter's story might merge back into the general Death Eater narrative. Frank and Alice Longbottom, and Neville. This is a crucial branch. The Longbottoms were the other family named by the prophecy parameters. In canon, after Voldemort's fall, a few Death Eaters, Bellatrix Lestrange, her husband Rodolphus, Rabastan Lestrange, and Barty Crouch Jr., attacked the Longbottoms, torturing them to insanity. In our alternate timeline, Voldemort is not gone, but the Longbottoms are still prominent Order members who have thrice defied him. Does Voldemort decide to eliminate them as well now? It could go either way. He might think the prophecy child is dealt with and ignore Neville, focusing his wrath elsewhere. Or he might, as a precaution, also target the Longbottoms soon after the Potters. Given Voldemort's thoroughness, I lean toward him deciding to tie up that loose end. Why allow any chance, however remote, that Neville could fit the prophecy? Within days or weeks of killing the Potters, Voldemort could send a squad of his most vicious followers, possibly led by Bellatrix Lestrange, who relishes such tasks, to attack Frank and Alice Longbottom. What happens then? Frank and Alice are extremely skilled Aurors. They won't be caught off guard easily. Perhaps they go into hiding too once news of the Potter's fate spreads, knowing Neville might be next. If the attack comes, we might get a battle. Perhaps the Longbottoms fight valiantly, but are overwhelmed by sheer numbers or cruelty. Bellatrix might delight in using the Cruciatus curse to torture information, or simply to cause pain. In one grim scenario, the Longbottoms are tortured into insanity, as in canon, or even killed outright if Voldemort gave that order. It's hard to see them emerging unscathed. At best, they might manage to escape and go on the run with baby Neville. But given their fate in canon during a less dire circumstance, post-war vengeance, it's likely that in this timeline, Frank and Alice are incapacitated or murdered by the Death Eaters not long after the Potters. If they survive physically, I suspect they end up in a permanent St. Mungo's hospital ward, minds irreparably damaged by torture. Either way, Neville Longbottom is removed from his parents' care by late 1981 or early 1982. If Frank and Alice are driven insane but alive, Neville is raised by his formidable grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, as in canon. If his parents were killed, Augusta also becomes his guardian. Neville thus grows up very similarly to how Harry would have at the Dursleys, as an orphan of war, albeit in a loving, if strict, magical home. But one huge difference: Neville doesn't become famous or marked as a chosen one openly. Harry's survival in canon was a visible, celebrated symbol. Neville's potential role in prophecy remains hidden. Dumbledore, however, is aware that Neville was the other child of prophecy. With Harry gone, Dumbledore's thoughts must turn to Neville. Dumbledore's strategy pivots. In the original timeline, Dumbledore's grand plan centered on Harry, protecting him, eventually guiding him to fulfill the prophecy. Now Dumbledore likely quietly shifts his hopes onto Neville Longbottom. He might not tell Augusta or Neville of the prophecy, he's careful with such knowledge, but Dumbledore will certainly arrange protections around Neville. Perhaps he places Neville's family under the Fidelius charm as well, or at least keeps a watchful eye on the boy's safety. If Frank and Alice survived but are incapacitated, Dumbledore will pity Neville deeply, and perhaps feel even more compelled to ensure this child gets a chance to grow up and fight when the time comes. That said, Neville's path to heroism will be very different from Harry's. Neville wasn't marked by Voldemort. He has no scar, no obvious chosen label. He's a shy, introverted boy, often underestimated. In a war-torn wizarding world, Neville might have a much harsher childhood, constant fear and security measures, stories of his parents' tragedy weighing on him. But sometimes, hard times forge steel. We'll revisit Neville's potential role later. He may yet play a crucial part in Voldemort's eventual fate. Now consider the broader wizarding world circa 1982. Voldemort, having removed the immediate prophecy threat, is at the height of his power. The Ministry of Magic is fighting a losing battle. Millicent Bagnold is minister until 1990 in canon. Under her watch, in this timeline, the war would continue ferociously. There's no period of peace to regroup. The Death Eaters keep attacking. Many ministry officials live in terror or are secretly under the Imperious curse. Bagnold's administration was willing to take tough measures. Barty Crouch Sr., as head of magical law enforcement, authorized auras to use unforgivable curses on suspects during the war. That tough-on-Death Eaters stance might intensify. Barty Crouch Sr. himself, who lost a son to Death Eater ideology, would be ruthlessly trying to stamp them out. But with Voldemort still directing his followers, the Death Eaters aren't leaderless fanatics. They're organized and deadly. We could imagine a series of grim events through the 1980s. Open battle in the streets, political assassinations, disappearances of prominent wizarding families who oppose Voldemort. The wizarding economy and social life deteriorate under the strain of constant fear. For Muggle-born witches and wizards, these are terrifying times. Many go into hiding or flee the country if they can, as Voldemort's regime targets mudbloods for persecution. Hogwarts remains open. Dumbledore is still headmaster and a beacon of opposition. But even at Hogwarts, the atmosphere is tense and polarized. Students hear whispers of war. Some have Death Eater parents. Others have parents in the Order or victims of attacks. Let's focus on Severus Snape's role during this period. Without any duplicity weighing on him, Snape likely becomes an important figure in Voldemort's inner circle. He was always a talented wizard. Now his talents are employed solely for Voldemort's benefit. Snape might be tasked with high-level spy work or magical research. Perhaps he's brewing batches of Veritaserum for interrogations, or creating new poisons to eliminate the Dark Lord's enemies silently. Given his Hogwarts connection, Voldemort might also use Snape to gather intelligence on Dumbledore, or even to infiltrate Hogwarts somehow. In the original timeline, Snape became potions master at Hogwarts in the fall of 1981, shortly after Voldemort's fall, a position arranged by Dumbledore to give Snape sanctuary and a cover. In this alternate timeline, that job offer likely never comes. Dumbledore would have no reason and no trust to hire Snape, who remains an unabashed Death Eater. Instead, the potions position at Hogwarts might have been filled by someone else. Perhaps Horace Slughorn never retired, or if he did, a different professor took the post. Snape is not stalking the dungeon halls of Hogwarts as a teacher, and generations of students do not suffer his sarcasm in class. This small detail has ripple effects too. Neville Longbottom's biggest fear at school was Professor Snape in the Boggart lesson. In this timeline, Neville's Boggart might be something or someone else entirely, since Snape isn't there to traumatize him in class. But we're not there yet. Snape, instead of teaching, likely stays in Voldemort's direct employ throughout the war. If needed, he could go on covert missions. He is skilled at occlumency, able to shield his mind from detection. Perhaps Snape occasionally puts on a false identity and infiltrates neutral areas, or even the Ministry to feed information back to Voldemort. In canon, Snape's occlumency was key to him deceiving Voldemort. Here, it could be used to deceive the Order or Ministry if he pretended to defect. Though without remorse, Snape would only pretend under Voldemort's orders, a reverse of the original spy situation. It's also possible Snape has direct confrontations with his old Hogwarts contemporaries on the battlefield. Imagine Snape dueling Order members like Alastor Moody or Kingsley Shacklebolt. Snape's inventiveness with spells, such as his deadly Sectum Sempra curse, could catch opponents off guard. He might seriously wound or kill someone significant. It's not pleasant to consider, but with Snape fully committed to evil, the Order of the Phoenix might suffer casualties at his wand. For example, Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, one of the greatest Aurors, could have a showdown with Snape at some point. Moody is ferociously tough, but Snape in this state has no compunction about fighting dirty. If Moody survived the First War in canon, he did. Perhaps here he does as well, but we can't be sure. In later years, Moody lost an eye and a leg in the fight against dark wizards, trophies of his battles. Maybe Snape was responsible for one of those injuries in this alternate war, blasting off Moody's limb or ruining his eye with a curse. It fits the narrative of Snape's malicious brilliance being unleashed. Snape also might cross paths with Order members who once were his classmates. Consider his former nemesis, Sirius Black, but Sirius is imprisoned and likely not a factor now. Remus Lupin, however, is active. If Remus and Snape encountered each other during a skirmish, there'd be no love lost. In canon, even as an Order ally, Snape harbored loathing for Remus due to old grievances. As an outright enemy here, Snape might attempt to kill Remus without hesitation. Remus, as a werewolf, could be a formidable opponent if provoked at the wrong time of month. But he'd avoid transformation in battle if possible. One wonders if Snape, potioneer that he is, would brew and distribute Wolfsbane potion to subjugate werewolves for Voldemort's side, or to neutralize enemy werewolves. He could ironically still create Wolfsbane, but instead of helping Remus, use it to entice werewolf packs. Voldemort might promise them Wolfsbane and freedom to attack, a dark bargain. This all paints a picture of a wizarding Britain descending deeper into darkness through the 1980s. By the end of that decade, it's very plausible that Lord Voldemort has either seized control of the Ministry of Magic outright, or reduced it to a figurehead regime while he rules from the shadows. Let's explore two possibilities. Possibility 1. Voldemort seizes power openly, faster rise. Perhaps emboldened by prophecy's defiance and frustrated with drawn-out guerrilla war, Voldemort mounts a direct coup on the Ministry. He has many sympathizers within and can imperious or assassinate those who stand against him. The minister, Millicent Bagnold, could be killed or forced out. Some sources hint that Bagnold stepped down in 1990 in canon. In this timeline, she might not make it that far. If Voldemort installs a puppet minister, maybe someone like Lucius Malfoy, or another influential pureblood under his thumb, the wizarding government essentially falls to Voldemort's rule by the late 1980s. Under such a regime, laws immediately turn draconian. Muggle-born registration, persecution of blood traitors, and absolute power vested in Voldemort, though he may not publicly announce himself as dictator, preferring to let a puppet front the administration while he wields true power. The Order of the Phoenix would be driven underground, effectively a rebel insurgency in a Voldemort-controlled state. Possibility 2. Voldemort continues a war of attrition. Slower rise, war drags on. Alternatively, Dumbledore and the Ministry manage to hold Voldemort at bay for longer, preventing an outright takeover, but unable to defeat him. This results in a protracted war that extends well into the 1990s. The wizarding population lives through a dark decade of fear and skirmishes, closer to how Muggles experienced World War II, or a prolonged conflict. Voldemort might prefer this scenario initially, keeping things in chaos, until he can eliminate Dumbledore, the one wizard he truly fears. Either route, Albus Dumbledore remains the biggest obstacle to Voldemort's absolute victory, and stands against him. There is hope for the light side. Voldemort knows this. Thus, a central question. What happens to Dumbledore without Snape's influence? In the original timeline, Snape ended up playing a direct role in Dumbledore's final year of life, containing a deadly curse and ultimately performing a mercy killing as part of a plan. How might things differ now? In 1996 of the original history, Dumbledore was severely injured by a curse from Marvolo Gaunt's ring, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and Severus Snape's timely action bought him a year to live. But would Dumbledore even discover that Horcrux in this timeline? Possibly yes, possibly no. It depends on how much time he has for Horcrux hunting amid the full-blown war. Dumbledore was always extremely perceptive. Even without the diary episode, which in canon confirmed Voldemort's Horcrux use, he might deduce that Voldemort could be effectively unkillable unless his soul anchors are destroyed. Perhaps, as the war drags on with Voldemort surviving things that should kill him, Dumbledore suspects and begins quietly seeking Horcruxes. If Dumbledore did find the ring Horcrux at the old Gaunt shack, his personality is such that he might still succumb to the temptation of the resurrection stone within it, trying to see his lost loved ones, thus cursing himself. That might happen sooner or later. Suppose it happens around the mid to late 1980s or early 90s as Dumbledore hunts for ways to defeat Voldemort. In the absence of Snape, who saved him in canon, Dumbledore would likely die much more quickly from the ring's curse. It was only Snape's advanced healing arts that contained the curse to Dumbledore's hand and slowed it. Without that aid, Dumbledore might only have days or weeks after being cursed. Conceivably, he could perish even before any final showdown with Voldemort, which would be disastrous for the good side. Alternatively, Dumbledore might be more cautious and not get cursed until later, or he might avoid the trap altogether, though curiosity was his flaw. Let's consider both sub-possibilities. Say Dumbledore dies around the late 1980s from the curse or in battle. If Dumbledore fell relatively early, say in a duel with Voldemort or via the ring's curse, the beacon of hope for the resistance is extinguished. The Order of the Phoenix would be leaderless, splintered. Voldemort, no longer having to fear the only wizard who could match him, would move swiftly to consolidate absolute control. Without Dumbledore's brilliance and power, it's doubtful anyone could prevent Voldemort's victory. This scenario likely ends with Voldemort reigning unopposed, a permanent triumph of darkness in Britain. Severus Snape, in that case, lives on as a high-ranking enforcer of Voldemort's new order, perhaps head of a reconstituted magical law enforcement that serves the Dark Lord's will. One can envision Snape, with cold satisfaction, presiding over trials of Muggleborns or traitors, or perhaps running Hogwarts as a dark headmaster to indoctrinate young wizards. Indeed, the Wizarding World official, What, if muses that if Voldemort had succeeded, he would install his best lieutenants to oversee Hogwarts, and Snape, loving the dark arts and having a talent for teaching it when allowed, would be an obvious choice. Imagine Headmaster Snape, this time not as a reluctant protector, but as an enthusiastic champion of Voldemort's ideology, turning the school into a factory for future Death Eaters. Alternatively, say Dumbledore survives into the 1990s and continues to counter Voldemort. If Dumbledore manages to avoid early death, the war likely continues into what we know as the timeline of Harry's school years. Except, of course, Harry is not there, and everything is more dire. Dumbledore would keep the Order alive and rally whatever allies he can. Perhaps he reaches out to international wizarding communities for help. The war might not stay confined to Britain. Other magical governments may intervene, or at least covertly support Dumbledore if Voldemort's terror threatens to spread. Under Dumbledore's leadership, the Order could evolve into a full resistance movement, with new young members coming of age and joining the fight. Now consider the 1990s generation, those who, in canon, would have been Harry's classmates. In this timeline, they grow up in a wartime society. Hogwarts in the 1990s is either a battleground of ideologies or under Death Eater occupation, depending on Voldemort's dominance at that point. Let's assume that by 1991, the start of what would have been Harry's first year, the war is still ongoing, but Hogwarts remains under Dumbledore's control. Neville Longbottom turns 11 in July 1991 and goes to Hogwarts, likely sorted into Gryffindor as in canon. However, he's carrying the legacy of his parents' tragedy and possibly the secret hope of Dumbledore that he might be the one to defeat Voldemort someday. Neville's personality in his early years was timid and insecure, partly due to overprotective upbringing by Gran Augusta. But the pressures of war might steal him sooner. Perhaps Dumbledore, or Professor McGonagall, or his formidable Gran, gently encourages Neville to believe in himself, knowing he might need to rise to a heroic role. Still, Neville would not have the same guided experiences Harry did. There's no equivalent of the Philosopher's Stone adventure or Chamber of Secrets ordeal tailored for Neville, unless circumstances provide their own tests. It could be that Neville slowly grows a backbone through witnessing injustice at Hogwarts, or in the world, and through mentorship by professors like Dumbledore or Moody. Hermione Granger also arrives at Hogwarts in 1991, Muggle-born and exceptionally gifted. But this is a terrible time to be Muggle-born. If the Ministry has fallen or anti-Muggle-born laws are in place by then, Hermione might face immediate persecution. Possibly, Dumbledore ensures she and other Muggle-born children are covertly brought to school and protected. Hermione's parents, as Muggles, would be frightened by the war. They might even hesitate to send her to Hogwarts, but Hermione's passion for learning magic is strong. At Hogwarts, Hermione's intelligence and drive for justice could make her an important figure in any student resistance. She might team up with Neville and other brave students to secretly oppose any Death Eater influence at school, much like the Dumbledore's army formed in canon, but maybe much earlier and more urgently. Ron Weasley and his siblings, Fred, George, Ginny, come from the staunchly anti-Voldemort Weasley family. The Weasleys would be prime targets in Voldemort's regime, blood traitors who support Muggle-born rights. Arthur Weasley's job at the Ministry, misuse of Muggle artifacts, might have gotten him in trouble if the Ministry turned dark. By 1990s, the Weasleys could be part of the active underground. Young Ron arrives at Hogwarts with a lot on his shoulders. Older brothers Bill and Charlie likely fought in the Order after school. Maybe they were injured or killed. Danger, not everyone survives. The Prewett brothers, Molly's siblings, died in Canon's First War. Perhaps Bill or Charlie might meet similar fates in prolonged war, which would devastate the Weasleys. Ron, Fred, and George attending Hogwarts in 1991 would almost certainly join whatever internal resistance might form among students. Under normal circumstances, Ron was a light-hearted, chess-playing kid. In this timeline, he might be forced to mature faster, coping with real danger to his family and friends. Now, if Hogwarts remains relatively safe until the mid-1990s, that changes soon after. Suppose Albus Dumbledore survives up to, say, 1995. That year in canon saw the rebirth of Voldemort, which isn't applicable here, he never fell, and the Ministry's denial of his return. In this timeline, by 1995, the Ministry is either under Voldemort's thumb or in open war with him. It's hard to imagine Dumbledore lasting this long without Voldemort forcing a confrontation. Perhaps around 1994 or 1995, Voldemort finally chooses to personally eliminate Dumbledore. Maybe an epic battle occurs at Hogwarts or the Ministry Atrium, echoing their duel in the canon 1996. Without Harry or the prophecy in play, Voldemort's sole focus would be to destroy Dumbledore and any remaining opposition. Let's entertain that a climactic confrontation happens. Dumbledore and Voldemort dueling fiercely, unleashing magic of awe-inspiring magnitude. Students and Order members might witness it. Perhaps it occurs at Hogwarts. Imagine the Great Hall or the grounds lit by flashes of magic as the greatest wizard of the age fights the darkest wizard of the age. Who wins? It's uncertain. In canon's only direct duel, Ministry Atrium, June 1996. Dumbledore held his own, and Voldemort fled when reinforcements arrived. Here, there may be no reinforcements, and both will fight to the finish. Dumbledore is mighty, but if he's also been bearing the weight of war for 14 years, he's older and possibly weakened, and if cursed by the ring by now, doomed. Voldemort, with his Horcruxes intact, has the advantage of near invulnerability. The likeliest result is Dumbledore's defeat and death. It could be a noble Pyrrhic victory, where Dumbledore perhaps destroys one Horcrux during the fight, or injures Voldemort, but ultimately he would fall. With Dumbledore gone, by the mid-90s, Voldemort's triumph would be all but sealed. The last formal obstacle removed, he would openly declare dominion. At this point, Hogwarts would definitely be seized by Death Eaters, if it hadn't been already. Severus Snape could be installed as headmaster, tasked with enforcing the new order on the next generation. Under Headmaster Snape and his Carrow deputies, Hogwarts becomes compulsory indoctrination for purebloods, and any remaining allowed half-blood or tolerated students. The curriculum warps. Defense against the dark arts becomes just dark arts class, taught with an eye toward using the unforgivable curses. Muggle studies becomes a mandatory propaganda course spouting anti-Muggle bile. Muggle-born children likely aren't allowed to attend at all now, or if they are, it's only to identify and segregate them for later persecution. Picture Hogwarts in this grim timeline around 1996 or 1997. The school's enchanted ceiling reflects dark clouds day after day. Hallways are patrolled by inquisitorial squad thugs and Death Eater professors ready to punish any dissent. The beloved Headmaster Dumbledore is dead, and perhaps his portrait has been removed or destroyed by Snape to prevent it advising anyone. Snape sits in the headmaster's office, a man who has at last gotten the defense against the dark arts position he coveted, ironically now free to teach it in its most vicious form. But is Snape content? This is what all his choices led him to: power, respect through fear, and the triumph of the ideology he bought into. One wonders if Snape, late at night in that office, ever feels a twinge of emptiness. He has everything he thought he wanted, and yet nothing of true human value. Without remorse or love, does he even recognize what he's lost? Perhaps not. In this timeline, Severus Snape's heart stays closed, his soul unredeemed. He most likely doubles down on cruelty, maybe convincing himself this outcome justifies all his youthful dreams of being great. Students tremble at his approach. Teachers, those who are Death Eaters or sympathizers, kowtow to him, and he metes out harsh discipline to any child who defies Voldemort's creed. For the remaining members of the Order of the Phoenix, those not captured or killed, these are desperate times. Some likely fled abroad to regroup. Some work in secret to help Muggle-born families escape, or to sabotage Voldemort's regime where they can. People like Kingsley Shacklebolt, Minerva McGonagall, Nymphadora Tonks, if she survived the drawn-out war, form an underground resistance. They might have safe houses, coded communication networks, and plans to one day overthrow the Dark Lord. And here we circle back to Neville Longbottom, who by 1996 to 97 would be a young man of 16-17. In the canon timeline, Neville came of age in Deathly Hallows as a surprisingly heroic figure, leading the students against Snape's regime at Hogwarts and slaying Voldemort's Snake Nagini in the final battle. In our alternate universe, Neville's importance only magnifies. If any glimmer of the prophecy still holds true, Neville may be the last hope. Dumbledore likely told at least one person, maybe McGonagall or Moody, about the prophecy and that Neville could fulfill it. Thus, the remaining order might rally around Neville, not unlike how they rallied around Harry in canon. Neville himself, having suffered so much, might find a resolve within. We saw in canon that when pushed to the wall, Neville developed courage and leadership. That would likely happen here as well, especially without overshadowing figures like Harry around. Perhaps Neville becomes the leader of a student rebellion inside Hogwarts during Snape's headmastership. Imagine Neville, along with Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood, and others, forming something akin to Dumbledore's army in secret. They conduct guerrilla tactics, freeing detained Muggle-born students, sabotaging Carrow's cruel punishments, writing clandestine messages of hope on walls. "Long live Dumbledore," or some such. Snape, in this timeline, would not secretly be protecting them. He truly would be their enemy. He'd hunt down the ringleaders mercilessly. Many students would be scared into compliance, but Neville and a brave few persist. Eventually, open rebellion might break out at Hogwarts, perhaps timed with some larger uprising the Order plans. We can envision a scenario in which Neville, clutching the sword of Gryffindor, stands defiantly against Snape and the Carrows. How might he get the sword? In canon, Snape secretly passed it to him via a hat in the Fiendfire of the Room of Requirement. But here, Snape wouldn't aid him. However, the sword has its own magic. It presents itself to worthy Gryffindors in times of need. If Neville truly embodies courage and need, the sword might come to him, from the sorting hat or some hidden place in Hogwarts at the critical moment. It's a long shot, but possible. A delayed echo of what Snape's cooperation expedited in canon. Armed with the sword, which is imbued with basilisk venom from the Chamber of Secrets incident that, notably, might not have happened in this timeline without Harry. Unless Ginny Weasley still encountered the diary, but with Voldemort alive and presumably keeping Horcruxes close, the diary may never have been used at Hogwarts. Yes, Horcruxes. We mustn't forget those. Voldemort's immortality still anchors him. Without Harry, he still has all his Horcruxes intact. The diary, the gaunt ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, and Nagini. To be defeated permanently, those Horcruxes need to be found and destroyed. Does anyone even know about them clearly? Dumbledore might have shared his theory with a few in the Order before dying, probably instructing them to find these objects. Perhaps Minerva McGonagall, or another trusted soul, picks up that quest once Dumbledore is gone. It would be much harder without the clues Dumbledore had painstakingly gathered alongside Harry in canon. But maybe some clues still emerge. For instance, Regulus Black's sacrifice to steal the locket Horcrux in 1979 might still have occurred. Regulus acted on his own, unrelated to Snape or Lily. If Kreacher the house elf still had that locket, or if the Order found out via Sirius's family home, the locket could be recovered and destroyed by the Resistance. However, Sirius is in prison or on the run in this timeline. Perhaps Regulus's secret remains undiscovered longer. Unless Sirius, rotting in Azkaban, raves about being innocent and mentions Pettigrew as a rat, unlikely anyone listens in that environment. It's plausible only a couple Horcruxes get destroyed by the time of any final uprising. Maybe the locket and the diadem. If Hogwarts fell, someone like Neville or Ginny might stumble on the Room of Requirement's hidden diadem. Many pieces of Voldemort's soul might remain, making him exceptionally hard to kill. This suggests that even if an uprising occurs, Voldemort might survive unless a very specific chain of events unfolds to eliminate his Horcruxes. However, here's a twist. Prophecy is a strange thing. It's stated, neither can live while the other survives. If we interpret that flexibly, perhaps it implies that as long as Voldemort lives, the one with power to vanquish him, initially Harry, alternatively Neville, will not truly live a normal life, and vice versa. In our scenario, Voldemort has been living unchecked, and Harry, the original chosen one, indeed did not survive. But if fate intended a balance, maybe Neville becomes the de facto chosen one. Maybe, in some final confrontation, prophecy finds its mark after all. Imagine a climactic battle at Hogwarts, a parallel to canon's Battle of Hogwarts in 1998. But now in maybe 1997 or 1998, between the remnants of the Order DA, Neville, Ginny, Hermione, Ron, etc., plus Order members who join the fray, and Voldemort's forces, Death Eaters, Snape, etc. This is essentially the last stand of the Resistance. Severus Snape would likely duel some of his former classmates or their children. How haunting to think. Snape might face Minerva McGonagall in a duel to assert control of the school. In canon's DH, Snape fled rather than fight McGonagall when he was actually on her side deep down. Here, he'd have no compunction. McGonagall is formidable. She might even overpower Snape if given the chance, as she nearly did in canon before he retreated. But if Snape fights to kill, he could injure or even kill her. Conversely, maybe McGonagall and a couple of colleagues, say Flitwick and Kingsley, similar to DH battle, take Snape down together. There is a poetic possibility. Snape might finally meet his end not by a Dark Lord's treachery, as in canon, but at the wand of someone he wronged and underestimated, perhaps Neville Longbottom himself. Neville, who had feared Snape more than anything as a child, could stand up to him at last. One can imagine Neville, sword in one hand, wand in the other, confronting Headmaster Snape to protect younger students. Neville has a personal score. Snape's allegiance caused Neville's parents suffering and the ruin of countless lives. It would be fitting justice if Neville were to defeat Snape in a duel, disarming him dramatically, or even striking a non-lethal but incapacitating blow. Neville might not have the malice to kill a defenseless opponent, but war can harden even the softest hearts. He might consider it his duty to eliminate Snape, or perhaps Snape's end comes when Voldemort himself, paranoid and cruel, turns on him. Although since Snape never betrayed Voldemort in this timeline, that might not happen unless Voldemort suspects him of some slight. However, Voldemort in Victory tends to purge any lieutenant he sees as too ambitious or no longer useful. Snape, being extremely skilled, could become a target of Voldemort's suspicion eventually. Without love or loyalty tying him elsewhere, Snape would likely remain true to Voldemort to the end, so Voldemort might not feel the need to dispose of him like he did in canon to gain Elder Wand mastery. Actually, the Elder Wand subplot likely doesn't happen here. Dumbledore wasn't disarmed by Snape, perhaps was killed by Voldemort directly, meaning Voldemort may already possess the Elder Wand legitimately if he took it from Dumbledore's body. Or if Dumbledore hid it, there's an open question. In any case, Snape wouldn't have become master of it. So Voldemort has no reason to kill Snape for that wand in this timeline. Snape could survive until nearly the very end of the war. Finally, we come to Voldemort's fate. Is it permanent victory, or can the forces of good still win, albeit slower, and at horrific cost? Two scenarios stand out. First, a total Voldemort victory, the darkest outcome. The resistance is quashed. Neville's brave attempt fails, and he is captured or killed. The last Horcruxes remain intact. Voldemort becomes an eternal tyrant, ruling Britain with an iron fist, perhaps eventually extending his dominion to other magical communities. Generations grow up under a dark empire. In this outcome, Snape lives on as a High Inquisitor figure, feared and reviled, never redeemed. He might eventually meet a dishonorable end. Even tyrannies have power struggles. Maybe a rival Death Eater poisons him out of envy, or Voldemort eliminates him in a purge. But the key point, love and sacrifice never had their day, and thus darkness reigns indefinitely. This is the most tragic timeline, and a very possible one given how critical Lily's love was originally. Second, a hard-fought victory for the light, a delayed, costly triumph. Alternately, perhaps the prophecy does find its mark through Neville. Let's say Neville and the Resistance managed to destroy the remaining Horcruxes one by one, some through luck, some through the wisdom Dumbledore managed to pass on. It might take years of covert operations, stealing the cup from Bellatrix's vault, hunting down Nagini on the battlefield, etc. Eventually, in a final showdown, Neville faces Voldemort. This Neville might not be as magically flashy as Harry, but he has immense heart and the courage of his convictions. If Voldemort has lost his Horcrux safety net, he can finally be killed. Perhaps Neville, in a duel reminiscent of David versus Goliath, surprises Voldemort, maybe using the sword of Gryffindor to strike the fatal blow. Since a Horcrux-laced Voldemort might require something as powerful as basilisk venom to truly destroy. One imagines Neville slashing Nagini, and then, with a sudden stroke, turning the sword on Voldemort, catching him off guard. Or Neville masterfully executing a curse at the exact moment Voldemort's last Horcrux is destroyed, fulfilling the prophecy's demand that one must die at the hand of the other. Voldemort, perhaps with disbelief, would fall. And this time, he does not rise again. The Death Eaters, leaderless, are finally routed. Such a victory would be bittersweet beyond measure. The wizarding world lies in ruins compared to the relatively happy state after the original Battle of Hogwarts. So many more lives would have been lost in these extra 16-17 years of war. Families like the Weasleys might be decimated. Who knows if Arthur, Molly, maybe some of their children survived the extended conflict. Hogwarts likely sustained terrible damage and memory of dark years. The Ministry would need rebuilding from the ground up after being a tool of evil for so long. And crucially, Severus Snape's legacy in this world is one of unmitigated villainy. If the light wins in the end, Snape will be remembered not as a hero who sacrificed everything out of love, as he is in the original timeline, but as a hateful man who willingly served tyranny. Perhaps his name becomes a curse that future parents do not name their children, synonymous with treachery and cruelty, much as Bellatrix or Voldemort would. If Snape were somehow captured alive at the war's end in this scenario, what then? It's hard to imagine him surrendering quietly. Given his character sans remorse, he might fight to the death. If captured, likely he'd be unrepentant. The victors would put him on trial for war crimes, and with no Dumbledore to vouch for any hidden goodness, Snape would certainly be condemned. Perhaps to Azkaban he'd go, to live out his remaining days stripped of power, reliving memories of the horrors he abetted. A pathetic end for a once brilliant wizard. And one can't help but reflect. All this came to pass because Snape never felt that deep love that, in another timeline, led him to regret and redemption. In a life without Lily's love, Severus Snape died as he lived, in darkness, unloved and unloving. This hypothetical journey has been long and harrowing. We watched a world where one small flame of love was never lit, and without it, darkness spread unchecked. Severus Snape without love is Severus Snape without remorse, without the sliver of light that Dumbledore once believed still glimmered in him. In this timeline, Snape never experiences that crushing pang of guilt on the windy hilltop with Dumbledore, never vows himself to protect an innocent child for the sake of the woman he loved. Instead, he pursues power and vengeance single-mindedly, and he achieves them, only to find them empty. He helps Voldemort win, for a time, but in doing so, helps destroy the very world that might have accepted him had he chosen differently. One of the most poignant elements of Snape's character in canon is that his love for Lily, though tragic and unreturned romantically, brought out the best in him. It was his saving grace, the single delicate thread holding him to the good side. When Lily was gone, Snape's love transformed into lifelong remorse and a pledge to fight evil internally. That personal grief was the spark that ignited his redemption arc. Without it, Snape never turns away from evil. He doesn't risk his life to spy for Dumbledore, doesn't spend years quietly ensuring Harry stays alive, doesn't take actions that ultimately lead to Voldemort's defeat. Instead, he becomes just another name on the list of Voldemort's cruel followers, perhaps an exceptionally dangerous one, but nothing more than a villain. It is sobering to realize how much depended on Snape's capacity to love. Not a grand, world-changing love visible to others, but a private, unrequited love that nevertheless had world-changing consequences. Remove that one humanizing element, and the ripple effect is catastrophic. The First Wizarding War drags on longer, claiming far more lives. The prophecy nearly fails. The boy who lived never rises, and only by the narrowest chance might the alternate chosen one, Neville, eventually fulfill it. Lord Voldemort's reign is longer and far more entrenched, nearly permanent. The entire climate of the magical world in the 1980s-90s shifts from hopeful to hopeless. Fear and hatred prevail for a generation. From a psychological perspective, Severus Snape's alternate life is also a case study in how the absence of love and regret can harden a soul beyond repair. In canon, even though Snape was often unpleasant and cruel on the surface, deep inside him was a broken heart and a conscience tortured by what he had done. That inner torment pushed him to atone, which in turn secretly redeemed many of his actions, even while he outwardly maintained the mask of a cynical Death Eater. In this alternate scenario, Snape has no broken heart. His heart never opened enough to be broken. Therefore, he feels no strong compunction about his wicked deeds. One could argue he might still feel some regret if, say, a friend of his was harmed, or if he realized Voldemort endangered something he personally cared about. But given Snape's trajectory here, he systematically stripped away anything that could soften him. By aligning completely with Voldemort's ideology, he even made himself numb to the murder of someone he once might have cared for, Lily. No remorse, no redemption. Snape's story becomes the tale of a man who had potential for greatness in either direction. In this world, he chose the darkness fully. We're left to reflect on the power of choice and the influence of love. So many characters' fates changed in this alternate history because Snape did not choose love. Would other characters have stepped up to fill the void? Some did. We imagined Neville and others bravely trying, but the cost was immeasurably higher. It's also a meditation on prophecy. It nearly became self-defeating here. By killing Harry outright, Voldemort almost wrote himself a permanent victory. If not for the slim chance of Neville rising much later, the prophecy would never have been fulfilled. It suggests that prophecies are not guarantees. It was love and choice that made the prophecy work, in the original timeline. Here, love was absent, and victory was almost lost. In the end, this what-if scenario underscores a profound theme. Redemption is born from the capacity to care about others. Severus Snape's redemption in canon was not a grand public act, but a quiet, decades-long penance driven by love and guilt. Remove the love, and he never seeks penance. Remove the guilt, and he never seeks to make things right. And without those, the world loses a crucial guardian in its darkest hour. A single change in a single heart can have consequences for countless lives. This alternative timeline has been haunting and illuminating. It shows a wizarding world that almost succumbed to evil, all for the lack of a man's love. In the final analysis, we return to the wisdom expressed by Dumbledore and others. It is our choices, far more than our abilities, that show who we truly are. Severus Snape's choice to love Lily, and to honor that love after her death, defined him as a complex hero in one universe. In another, his choice to forsake love for power defines him as a villain, and the entire fate of the war shifts accordingly. Thankfully, in the canon we know, love did take root in Snape's heart, flawed and painful as it was, and it altered the course of history for the better. Harry Potter lived and triumphed, Voldemort was vanquished, and even Snape, bitter, prickly, tormented Snape, earned a measure of posthumous redemption and respect. The boy who lived grew up, never knowing that his life had hung on a promise made out of love for his mother. As Harry later tells his own son, Severus Snape was one of the bravest men he ever knew. In this hypothetical world without that bravery born of love, we're left with a chilling question. Could anyone have defeated Voldemort at all? Maybe yes, eventually, but at a staggering cost. One thing is clear. The love Snape bore for Lily Evans, though it brought him lifelong sorrow, also sowed the seeds of hope and healing. It reminds us that even unrequited love, even a single act of compassion, can ripple outward to change the world. And it raises a human truth. Without love, there may be no remorse. Without remorse, no chance for redemption. In the end, the saga of a Snape who never loved Lily is a bleak one. A cautionary tale of what might have been had one man's heart stayed closed. It throws into relief just how crucial that spark of personal grief was to ignite the better angels of Severus Snape's nature. And it affirms a core theme of the Harry Potter story. Love is the power the Dark Lord knows not. In this alternate timeline, Voldemort unknowingly removed that power from the equation by ensuring Snape never loved at all, and nearly guaranteed himself eternal victory thereby. Fortunately, in the world we know, love did bloom in unlikely places. In the dungeons of Hogwarts, inside a lonely boy who fell for a girl with red hair. That love led him to make the hardest choice, to defect from everything he'd worked for, and to spend the rest of his life covertly fighting evil. It was not a fairy tale romance by any stretch, but it was profound in its consequences. Lily's influence made Snape choose the light, however covertly. This what-if scenario serves to underscore the immense difference that choice made. So, what if Severus Snape never loved Lily Evans? The answer, as we've seen, is a darker wizarding world where many heroes died and Voldemort's shadow loomed far longer. It's a world almost bereft of redemption for the Man in Black, a world that, in the final accounting, teaches us to value even the smallest acts of love and loyalty, for they can turn the tide of history. In closing, one can't help but feel a pang of gratitude for the reality where Snape did love Lily. His love, though it brought him endless pain, became the unseen linchpin of Voldemort's defeat. It's a testament to the notion that no act of love is ever truly wasted. Even unfulfilled, even kept secret, love can inspire sacrifice, and sacrifice can redeem even the most conflicted soul. Severus Snape's life in the real timeline was grey and ambiguous, full of mistakes and atonement, light and dark. In the alternate timeline, he is almost purely dark, an object lesson in what happens when a person shuts out the light completely. At the end of the day, this imaginary history leaves us with a powerful reminder. We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That's who we really are. Snape could have been a devil or a hero. In one world he leaned one way, in another, the opposite. The worlds those choices create are night and day. Our exploration of a Snape without love drives home the moral that J.K. Rowling wove throughout Harry's story. Love and empathy are what make redemption possible. Thankfully, in the story we cherish, Severus Snape chose, however belatedly and begrudgingly, to act on the sliver of light inside him, and that made all the difference.